Hello, welcome back. This is going to be another episode of Big Fat Questions. In this case, it's more of no one's specifically asked this, but kind of everyone is asking this kind of situation where I'm just going to answer a question that I feel like people ask all the time, and they sort of ask without realize they're asking it. And the question is, why are people fat? Right? So, and we see a lot of this in our scientific research. For example, you get a lot of, because this is a framing problem, right? So you get a lot of research that's kind of asking, or it's scientific research into the question of why are people fat? But there's an unspoken kind of additional question that follows from that that's like, and how can we make them stop? It's like, how can we make these fat people stop being fat? And the research on that is pretty clear that you can't. Some people are just going to be fat. I mean, this is a question that is asked a lot and by people who don't seem to understand the sort of history and the facts of the question, which is concerning when we have scientists who are designing studies that don't seem to take the entire full factor into account. For example, I'll give you an example, right? So we have all these studies, or people claim that these studies are showing that like fat people die more than thin people do, which is a bizarre thing to say in the first place because like everyone's gonna die. But excess mortality. I already talked about this in the BMI videos. So we're talking about excess mortality here. So basically people dying sooner than they would otherwise, which is, we're already talking about like a construction of, there's a lot of assumptions in that anyway. Like, what is considered to be too soon is like a factor of where you are, what the life expectancies are in the group that you are in, the time period that you live in. Like the life expectancies of people 200 years ago are certainly not what they are now. So, these are all things to keep in mind. But when people are making these studies and they're saying, well, fat people have worse health outcomes, but, and I've even spoken to people about this online where I'm just like, well, I don't understand how you can have these studies that are very blaming of like fat people's, lifestyles, in order to say that like, well, they have worse health outcomes, when we also know that like doctors frequently won't treat fat people properly. Like fat people as a group don't have access to medical care in the same way that thin people do. And that's something that is going to greatly affect how your health outcomes are, right? So this is kind of, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where when you're asking a question, a lot of times there are assumptions within that question that go unexamined. And I really want people to do a better job of, digging into what those underlying assumptions are. So in the case of, let's say, for example, why are fat people fat? I have a lot of problems with this as a question. But, a lot of times it's sort of posed as like that people are fatter than they used to be. There's more fat people now than there used to be. Generally, when people say that, they're talking about either from, the 20th century forward, or generally like post World War II forward. But that's a time period that has seen like huge changes in the way that people live, in the kind of jobs that they have. And, it's not just like the food that they eat, it's the jobs that they have, the places that they go, how people are in contact with each other. The lives that we have now are so different than the lives that we could have expected to have 150 years ago, that it seems like saying, well, now there's this thing is different than it used to be, like, in the 50s. And so, like, why is that? That, like, you're gonna have to take you're gonna have to take into account a lot of factors. Like, for example, right? A lot of people don't know, as I talked about in my BMI videos, they changed the BMI standards in the 90s. The post-war period, right? Or the period of, after World War I, or wherever you want to start. First of all, we have to take into account that people didn't used to weigh themselves. Home, like, having a scale in your home was not a thing for a really long time. So we don't even have weights for people past a certain point. So, it's really hard to make those comparisons. And if you want to say, like, a lot of times when we get these, like, really screamy headlines, like, more people overweight than ever before, it's like, what counts as overweight on the BMI scale was changed. So, therefore, you have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, which most people aren't. And then, so many changes. Like, I made a list. So there's the I call it the great BMI switcheroo of the 90s. But, this was done in order to justify what has become a moral panic, in order to directly benefit the weight loss companies. It was specifically done in order to help get through the sort of notorious medicine fen that, like, killed people, right? It was so dangerous that, like, the drug company had to, like, prove that the danger that, like, this medicine was alleviating was big enough to, like, account for the extremely bad risks that they were putting people through. And the way that they did that was by joggling around the numbers, making up these fake death statistics that I've already talked about. So these things were done for a reason, and it's not a good reason. It's like a really gross capitalist reason. So you shouldn't take any of that stuff at face value. Like, just make sure you know kind of what people are talking about. Anything that you see in the headlines of people talking about weight, you really should take with a grain of salt, I think. Okay, so why are people fat? Well, number one, genetics. Weight is heritable roughly or a little bit more at the same rate as height. So there are other factors that come in for sure. So it's not like 100%. It's like 80-something%, I think they found. So that's a situation where if everybody in your family is fat, there's a much higher likelihood that you will also be fat. Now, why would that be? Okay, so the body doesn't know the difference between a diet and a famine. And a lot of people in our societies are people who have people who are working class, lower class, poor, generationally poor, have families where people have like generational food insecurity, people who survived, the descendants of people who have survived famines, right? So we're just now in a situation where some people are getting enough food, and like in the New Deal, War on Poverty, food assistance. Okay, so in the 1970s, Lyndon Johnson's like war on poverty, and then the New Deal, getting people jobs, making sure people had money, the start of the social safety net in the United States is as bad as it is. There is, something, right? Before that, like, people did not have access to food, and like, well, what happened to people? Well, they died, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, what did people do back in the old days? Well, they just died. Like, that's what happened, right? So, it's kind of a brutal coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence, but it's pretty brutal to see that, like, we didn't have food assistance for very long before people, not even a generation, before people started, like, kind of wailing that people were, like, getting too fat. Well, these kinds of, I've done a little bit of reading that, they've done some studies on like, the descendants of famine survivors, and that these things can cause permanent changes to your DNA structure that are passed on, and that is that's something that's going to be, in your body's makeup, going forward. And so the other thing that people don't talk about is that during the same period of time, the period of time that people are like, oh my God, people are so fat, it's so bad, it's bad, it's bad, people are fat and it's bad, right? This is the same time period where height has gone up and life expectancy has gone up. And nobody seems to mind those, right? So you get studies sometimes where you're like, oh, well, these people were living in a, like, pre-industrial way, and now they've come into the city, and, they have, I guess, city jobs or whatever, and then people got fat and, like, got type 2 diabetes. Okay, not to say that those things didn't happen, but the same studies that a lot of times people are talking about, people's life expectancies also went up. And so, like, I think that's a really important part of the discussion, because we're getting a lot of claims that people are dying. We have to save these people. They're dying. It's like, but that's not really true. So, check out my death stats video. Again, like, these numbers have been cooked to death, right? So we're kind of left in a situation where, unfortunately, we can't really trust the numbers that are coming out. Like, when someone's giving you these numbers, you have to dig into them. Right. And other things that have happened in the post-war period, suburbanization, right? People don't walk, like, especially in America where I live, in a lot of places, it is not conducive to walking. Things are not accessible. You have to have a car. And, people don't do manual labor at the same rates. Now, that's like, I'm not advocating for people to go back to doing manual labor if that's not something that they want to do. I don't want to. But, I mean, it's just a value neutral fact. Like, people who are doing subsistence kind of farm living, and hunting and things, like, they are doing, like, manual physical labor in a way that people who don't do that kind of thing aren't. And that's just factual, right? So, and that affects everybody. Like, that doesn't affect just, like, fat people. That's like a cultural issue, this culture-wide issue. So, I also wanted to, I'm looking at my little list, haha. I also wanted to mention, there was a low-fat dieting fad in the 1970s. It was pushed down from the government, from up top. And low-fat dieting is not good. And, what do we know about dieting? Dieting makes people fatter. So, when you talk about, like, oh, there are more type 2 diabetes cases than there used to be, that's factual. But they're testing for type 2 diabetes way more than they used to. That's just a value neutral fact. Like, if you test for something more, you're going to find more cases of it. Which is good for the people who, need to get treatment, but it doesn't really apples to apples correspond. You can't take numbers from, like, the 50s or 60s and say, oh, well, this is good, but, or the 30s, and say, like, people didn't have type 2 diabetes at the same rates in the 30s because, like, well, they were not testing people for that. They didn't have the same kind of tests. The blood sugar cutoff for what counts as type 2 diabetes has been lowered. Now, I have not researched into why that was done. There may be a very good reason for it, but the fact is that if you're saying, well, there used to be less type 2 diabetes cases, if you are testing for more people, you're testing more people, right? And you've, changed the, oh my God, it's beeping so much. I hope you guys can't hear the beeping. If the like cutoffs, the what's the word I'm thinking of? The standards, right? You've changed the standards and then said to make it, more people are, if you lower the standards, more people are going to be classified, then you're in a situation where you are going to have more cases. Now, what do we want? If we want less type 2 diabetes, which we obviously do, diabetes is serious, and you don't want people to have diabetes because it's tough. It's a really tough illness. But it seems like to me, rather than spending all this time and money berating people to do things that are not gonna help, maybe spend that money on looking for a cure for type 2 diabetes. Maybe that's what we should be using the money for. Let's cure it. But, and also people's whole idea about type 2 diabetes is just incorrect, because the disease processes of insulin resistance that progress in type 2 diabetes, because type 1 diabetes is a totally different disease process. It's completely different. They might as well be different diseases. They just both have to do with insulin. The disease process in the type 2 diabetes, the insulin resistance causes weight gain. So people are like, oh, these people got fatter and then they got type 2 diabetes. It may be that they were getting type 2 diabetes and that caused them to gain weight. Or, dieting, I don't want to say dieting causes type 2 diabetes, because that's not what the research says. There's a correlation between people who have between groups of people who have dieted and groups of people who have not. The groups that have dieted have more type 2 diabetes. They have more heart disease. They have more, of all the things that people are like, oh, fat, bad fat, the cure is causing the problem, potentially, and I would love to see more research into that if it's possible to do. But when you do research, and these studies that do correlation, epidemiological studies, you take two groups of people, right? And you say, okay, we're going to study these two groups. One's going to be the control and one's going to be the experiment group. And you would like, as much as you can, to have those groups be as big as possible, have same type of people in them have the similar experiences, and follow them as long as you can, right? So there are studies that have been done on preschool, right? So let's take weight out of it completely, and we'll say, okay, what does preschool do for kids? How is it good? How good is it? Does it cause, excuse me, does it cause measurable effects that can affect people throughout their lives? So, and people have done these studies. You take, two groups of kids, and you would want them to be in the same neighborhood, maybe the same socioeconomic status, the same kind of racial makeups, same gender makeups, is equal and the same as you can. Say you have 50 kids here, 50 kids here. Well, so and 50 of them go to preschool and 50 of them don't. And you follow them for, let's say, 10, 15 years, right? Well, what if in the kids who didn't go to preschool, what if 35 of those kids, their parents get divorced, or they lose a parent, to something? Well, that's going to affect, early childhood development, but that's not something that you can control for. You can't control for everything when you're talking about people out there living their lives. It's just not possible. So what you would want to see is a huge difference, right? So if you're well, there's it's 50 times different, or it's 100 times different, then, okay, now we're talking, but if you're well, it's a percentage difference, 5% difference, 0.5% difference, then to me, that's within the sort of bounds of people are just different, and people have different lives, right? So the differences that we see between thin and fat people, they are small, and they can be, what I'm talking about when I'm saying BMI switcheroo, all these things that happened, like, because people want to be like, it's McDonald's. McDonald's did it. Fast food's done it. Soda's done it. Like, all these things that are, like, such a part of, like, modern life that, maybe in the 20s or 30s, like, weren't, but, like, so many things are different, right? Like, are we talking about, like, comparing a time when, like, women couldn't vote to a time to now? Like, people didn't have access to things, like, you couldn't do things. Like, it's just such a different time. Even the 60s are so different. Like, you couldn't even get your own credit. Like, you couldn't have bank accounts in your own name if you were a woman, and it was, like, not that long ago. So, we've made these huge social changes, and to just be like, I know it's McDonald's. Like, you can't, I don't know that there's a way to prove that out. Like, I don't know that you could design a study that would be able to say, this is the one thing. Because there are too many factors. There's too much change. There's too many differences. And like, why do people want that so bad? They want to be able to be like, well, that's the reason. I blame this thing. And it's just like, what do you actually want? Like, that's what I want to say. Like, what do you want? Do you want people to eat more whole foods, slow cooked meals? Well, you gotta fit that into people's lives. Like, you have to, like, give people, the ability to do that. You can't just be like, oh, like the Michael Pollan thing, like, oh, wasn't it great when grandma made us all home-cooked meals? Well, I don't know, Michael, great for who? Was that what your grandmother wanted to do with her time? Like, if she had options, would she have maybe wanted to do something other than just like, backbreaking unpaid labor? I mean, and some people do want to stay at home, and they do want to make, like, home cooked meals, and they do want to do all this stuff, and they don't have the ability to, because, like, you can't live on one person's salary and have kids, that's for sure. But a lot of people don't want to do that. And this is, like, we're getting into a lot of stuff that's extremely gendered, where it's like, who is the one who is gonna do all this, right? Like, you want mom to go home and do all these things, but, like, are you gonna pay her? Like, what if you don't want to cook? Like, what if you can't cook? What if you don't have time? What if you don't have the money? I think these things, if you make a solution to a problem that doesn't work for people, it's not really a solution. It's just like, look at how morally superior I am. And that's classist, and it's pretty sexist, and it's, it's fatphobic, because, we see all these things when people all the time want to be like, well, food deserts are bad. When people can't get fresh produce, that's bad. And I'm like, I agree. And they're like, because it makes them fat. And I'm like, whoa. So if it didn't make them fat, it would be fine? I don't think so. But it's just like, you gotta hang this stuff on how much you hate fat people. We're just gonna hang it. We're gonna hang it. We're gonna hang this. And, like, what do you actually want to happen, right? If the problem is that there are areas that grocery stores will not open up, we'll have the state open a grocery store, right? If people don't have jobs, you could hire them. That's a solution. When people say, like, oh, well, we have to get people jobs, and we're going to give these rich people tax cuts, and then maybe they'll hire some people. That's real roundabout. Like, what do you actually want to do? Because in that case, what people want to do is just give rich people money. If what you really wanted to do was give people jobs, you would just hire them and give them a job, right? So if you want people to eat whole food, slow cooked, no preservative meals, you've got to provide a way for that to happen, right? And it shouldn't be hung on, like, these people are bad and they're doing bad things. Look at these fat people, they're so bad, right? If you want to cure type 2 diabetes, which is, by the way, a thing that thin people also get. And they don't get screened for it. So thin people are actually being hurt by the stigma that fat people are the ones who get type 2 diabetes, because, like, how bad does your type 2 diabetes have to get if you're thin for anyone to even notice? Right? So these are all, like, the questions that these are the questions that I have, right? Why are fat people fat? Why are you asking that? Like, why? Because nobody says, why are some people tall and some people are shorter? Which I think that is not an uninteresting question, but it's not a question that people ask with this, like, level of, like, moral superiority and, like, sort of desperation, where when it comes to fat people, because we're in a moral panic, they do that. And so the question is not, why are fat people fat, which is a question that may not be able to be answered, or if it does have answers, the answers are gonna be complicated, and it's gonna be, like, there's a lot involved in that. And so, like, but people don't want to hear that, right? So I don't know, I just find it very frustrating, because, like, why, because the like, why is this like this is a question that I really love, and, like, love digging into. But, like, I don't love it when people are asking it in a really, like, not truthful way. Like, if you want to ask the question, how can we get rid of the fat people, just ask that question. Like, be honest. If your question is, how can we cure type 2 diabetes, well, then that shouldn't be a size thing, right? Well, if your question is, how can we make sure that people in underserved areas have access to, like, proper food, that's not a size thing either, right? So, like, how can we help people to find movement that they enjoy and make sure that they have time to engage in that kind of movement? How can we make sure that people have access to enough money so they're not stressed out all the time? Stress is, like, really bad for you. And, like, this, like, people's wages are not going up. People have less and less time. They're working more and more and more. These things are bad. So if there are things that we can do to get people more wages, more money, more leisure time, then trust people to, like, know what is best for them and their families. There's so much, like, really patronizing, like, rhetoric that goes along with all this stuff. Like, well, these people don't know how to take care of themselves, so we just have to teach them. You don't need to teach people things. Like, if you want to set up free cooking classes for people, then the people who want to cook will show up. But if the question is, like, what can we do to make sure that people have food that is, healthful for them, well, subheading also, what is healthful for one person is not going to be healthful for another. People who have, like, gastro issues with their stomachs and intestines, a lot of times they can't eat vegetables because it causes a lot of problems with, the issues that they already have. Some people are allergic to dairy. Some people don't eat meat. Some people can't, like, need to eat meat. Like, some people, like, whatever health thing with food that people think is, like, the number one, like, this is true for everybody, I promise you can find somebody that it's not true for. So you can't make these blanket statements, right? You can, but you're wrong. Like, you can't make these statements that are, like, because you have to give people resources, and then you trust them to choose and to make those decisions. And people make decisions for a lot of different reasons. And, like, just because you think that they should do it in a way that is, to you, more rational, that doesn't mean anything. That's not how people behave. If people were, like, going off of, like, what they could, what was rational, what, like, is proven by science, like, then the diet industry would be dead. But, like, what goes with my personal experience of, like, what works and what doesn't. If that's how people are making decisions, then we wouldn't have a diet industry, because science has shown that it doesn't work. It's not rational to devote this much like time and effort, considering that the science is against you, and also like everyone knows that it doesn't work. People know that through their own experience, through watching other people. I mean, everyone knows someone or is someone themselves who has done the diet like merry-go-round over and over and over and over and over, I think that should, just that alone should prove that like people have a lot of really complicated reasons for the reasons that they do things. And so I mean, why are people fat? Because fat people exist. Because fat people have always existed. Because size differences are normal, right? So I really like would call on people to, when they see people kind of just blithely saying these things like, well, why, like, to see if you can hear the questions that they aren't asking, the assumptions that they've made that they're not questioning, the things that like, there's like, when you come to a question like, why are people fat? There's like an entire scaffolding of things that they're assuming and they haven't thought about that like underlie that. And so that's what I would more want to talk about. That's what I would want to question. Because I could tell you all day that people are fat for different reasons. Like, I mean, it's like, why are people fat? They're probably different reasons for every person. It's like, why is someone 6 foot tall and someone else is 5'8"? Like, there's a lot of reasons. But like, there's so many value judgments just like jammed into that is something that I would ask for people to do a better job of questioning. This is the framing, right? I talked about framing a little bit in BMI Part 1, but so much of this is framing. And you cannot see what you won't let yourself see, right? If you're just like, I'm in this box, and the only things that I can think about are the things that are in this box of my assumptions, you're missing a lot. So it shouldn't be threatening. If you feel comfortable in your conclusions, well, then it shouldn't be threatening to undo the box and look at the whole picture. If you're comfortable with what you think, then you should just be reinforced in that. And if you're not, well, then that's another question to answer. Or, to ask yourself, like, why do I think these things? Like, why am I like in the position that I'm in? Like, what does it mean? Like, what are these things? What is the history? These are important, like the historical, like the way that fatness and dieting have come through history is extremely framing of like the things that we do now. Every fad diet is something that has been done before, and like they're never new. And none of these things are new, and they've been written about and they've been talked about over and over and over. And I just would really encourage people to spend more time thinking, trying to see around your assumptions, and like see what they are. Are they true? And like, I was raised in a condition where like I was taught that creationism was real, that the Bible was literally true, and those were my set assumptions for a period of time, and they're not now. And it's good to have a spirit of like, just because I was told something doesn't mean that it's necessarily true, and I will check on this, and I will look into it, and I will do some research, because you don't just have to take what's handed to you. Like you can make your own decisions and think your own thoughts, and it's always better to know what you're like, assumptions are. Like, my assumptions are that fat people are people, and that treating fat people poorly is bad. And my assumptions are that dieting doesn't work and is bound to fail. And, you know, I have developed these assumptions through a lot of soul searching and a lot of research. And because I came up in the exact same world that you live in, where I was taught that I was bad, that my body was bad, that, you know, if I could just give it a really good try, that it would definitely work this time, even though it never did. And that when it didn't work, it was my fault. And so, those are bad assumptions. So now I'm just kind of, I think I'm done, maybe rambling a little bit, but, that's it. And, if you have a question, leave it for me in the comments. Please like this video and please subscribe to my channel. It helps more people to find my work and it makes me happy. So I'll see you again pretty soon.